Hello everybody, it's Kate here and welcome back to Mosse on a Monday. For September, it's a new term if you're going back to school or to college, or maybe you're starting a new job. I took a bit of a break over the summer with the Ghost Ship and I'm about to go back on tour, but it meant that I had lots of time to read. So here I am with 2 fiction and 2 non-fiction that I think you'll really enjoy. So the first one this is a book proof, is called Wifedom by Anna Funder, and many of you will know her. She's the extraordinary writer of Stasiland, amongst other books, and this is subtitled Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. And you know, this book is just brilliant. I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of non-fiction. It's a book about what it means to be a writer. It's a book about how she, Anna, as a writer, a great admirer of George Orwell, the author, obviously, found herself in a kind of in-between moment, thinking about all the plans she had, but she was somehow rather mired in domesticity, and found in a second-hand bookshop in her native Sydney, where she lives, some early essays of George Orwell, and she'd always admired him. And little by little, she realised that his wife, Eileen Blair, he of course was Eric Blair, was completely missing. There were mentions of her every now and again, but really was essentially missing. And she went to all the biographies of George Orwell, and she still admires him very much, and that hasn't changed in the course of the writing of this biography of his missing wife. She read all 6 of them, 7 male authors writing about one man, and noticed that, again, Eileen Blair just wasn't there. So she wanted to find out who Eileen Blair was, and in 2005 what made the difference was that letters that had been written by Eileen Blair to her best friend came to light. So they weren't available when the early biographies were being written, but it became clear that, far from being the shadowy domestic presence only, that his wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, as she was born, was the most extraordinary woman, incredibly involved in his writing and his career, looking after him. And it set Anna Funder on, I suppose, a journey to find out why was it that such a brilliant woman had been so completely written out, not just of history, but by her husband himself, who clearly did love her. And it's a book, therefore, about how fiction is made, how writers are made, how people can be incredibly important as writers but have an extraordinary blind spot. So the man who is talking so much about the abuses of power, about race, about class, about sex, could also be so very blind to patriarchy and how that was working, and how women are smothered by domesticity and make the choice sometimes to do that. There's the most extraordinary evidence that she's uncovered about Eileen O'Shaughnessy's life, their relatively short marriage, her extraordinary stoicism. But the reason that I think this book is so brilliant is that Anna Funder is a superb writer. She's a superb critic. She is a chronicler. She herself is present in the book, and this teaches you everything about how you write a biography, what it means to try to tell the truth of a situation, and how you learn about yourself, and how you learn to deal and separate the brilliance of a writer's work from the person that they were. And that is an enormous topic at the moment in reading and writing. It always has been, but it's particularly sharp at the moment. So it came out only in August 2023, but I cannot recommend this book enough. It blew me away and I read it in one sitting. So this is Wifedom, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. It's published by Viking, part of the Penguin Group, and you won't regret it. Extraordinary piece of work. Right, also a phenomenon of the summer of 2023 in the UK and America and all over the world is a novel called Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. Now, I am only going to hold up her previous book, Babel, and she writes this. So this is Harper Voyager, I suppose you could call fantasy more, and she publishes as R.F. Kuang in her fantasy, and Babel was a #1 bestseller. And the reason I can't hold up Yellowface is that, again, I read it in one city, in a hotel, when I was at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and left it behind. So we're dropping in the picture for you, but you will have seen it everywhere. I mean, it's a superb novel about publishing, about an American author who is best friends with somebody, Athena Liu, who is the success. Everything goes right for her. You know, she gets her first book deal when she's still at college, university in America. She's seen as this great voice of a generation. She's incredibly popular. Everything is going her way. And her friend, June Hayward, and they meet at college, and she's very much overlooked, and her debut novel has been a complete failure. And she's still not quite sure why Athena likes her, and they don't see each other that much. And there they are in Washington, and they go out for drinks, and then there is a freak accident. And essentially, June Hayward, who is known as Junie, becomes a different writer, takes on a different name. And does she steal a manuscript? Does she rewrite a manuscript? Does she steal Athena Liu's character? It's a really extraordinary takedown of American publishing. It's a book, a very clever literary novel, mass market selling, but literary novel about how publishing works, how people are in one minute, out the next, the incredible drive for fame, social media. It's about Twitter takedowns. It's about how the beast feeds on the beast. So you know you shouldn't look at your reviews, but you read your reviews and they make you really depressed. And then and it's funny and it's clever. And as she becomes this new writer, Junie becomes Juniper Song. Is she being dishonest about her heritage? Is this cultural appropriation? It's a wonderful novel, and it's one of those that has been everywhere. #1 in the UK, New York Times. It was a Reese Witherspoon book pick. She's relatively young still, Rebecca F. Kuang, so she is actually, you know, the character in the book. I loved one moment when she's talking about the book, and everybody thinks this book is incredibly important. I won't tell you much about it, I don't want to spoil anything, but there was a bit that for me was wonderful when she said, you know, she didn't expect it to win the Booker Prize or even the Women's Prize, and as one of the founders of the Women's Prize for Fiction, again, just seeing that appear, because it is a book about how culture is made and who makes it, and how authors go in and out of fashion, and how it can just destroy you. The need to be seen, the need to be more successful than other people. So I picked it up thinking, I got to read this because everybody's reading it, and it's important, obviously, to be part of the story, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fantastic read and really hits a lot of the daftness of publishing right on the nose. So I've got Babel, but you will see the picture on the screen now. Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang absolutely deserves its multi-million best-selling status. So the next piece of non-fiction, my second non-fiction for September, Mosse on a Monday 2023, is, and I know you don't like me doing this, but you can pre-order this, but again, I've just read it, so I wanted to share it with you. And it's called A History of Women in 101 Objects. It's by a German-French writer, written in German originally, called Annabelle Hirsch, and translated by Eleanor Updegraff. And it will come out from Canongate in the autumn of 2023. And those of you who've been following me on Mosse on a Monday, or have been reading my books and have been following my theatre tour, Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries, will not be surprised that a different way of telling women's history and how women are sometimes made invisible would appeal to me. And it's, I very much admire Neil MacGregor, who used to be the director of the British Museum, and he wrote a beautiful book about the history of the world in 101 objects. And so this very much appealed to me. And she, again, I suppose in a funny sort of way, rather like Anna Funda, is very good at putting herself in to the book. So although this is a history of women told through objects, it's also about her as a woman born, you know, at the end of the 20th century. She describes herself as, this collection is absolutely subjective. It wasn't curated by a historian, but a woman who grew up between France and Germany at the end of the 20th century, a woman who loves women, their objects and their stories. A collection chosen by a woman who has a penchant for the unimportant and the anecdotal, and who enjoys taking imaginary walks through the distant past. And so, you know, it does exactly what it says, this book, which is objects that appeal to her, that she feels tells a particular type of story. So one of them is a 17th century paper scroll, and it is, I mean, not a contemporary copy of The Tale of Genji, and it is an extraordinary book, the first novel that we think of, written by a woman called Murasaki Shikabu, who is in my book, Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries. You can see it's just the paper scroll. Here is the picture. And of course that wasn't when it came out. It came out several centuries earlier. But it's a beautiful way of telling how an object, when you hold it, and I believe this absolutely in my fiction and non-fiction, can link you with all the people that have held it beforehand. So that was, there are obviously 101 objects in the book, and I'm not going to go through them all. They go from the earliest history. They are often very intimate objects like contraception, or horrible objects like thumb screws or a scold's bridle. Some are very extraordinary, like a pair of shoes with a heel. One of these I picked out partly because what I loved about the book is because it's written in German, but she is German and French. It isn't so Anglophone as many of the books in this area, of course. So one of them she picked out was this poster from 1900, Claudine at School. And Claudine is incredibly important in French culture, and nobody walking around Paris in 1900 would not be reading about these beautiful stories, these fresh stories of a 15-year-old Parisian schoolgirl, and they were everywhere. And everybody was talking about Claudine. And you can see, I took it away too soon, but it says Claudine à l'école, Claudine at school, par Willy. Now, Willy is a male writer, and people were saying, isn't it incredible that he could so perfectly get into the head of a 15-year-old Parisian schoolgirl? But of course, what it turned out was that he hadn't. They were written by his wife, Colette. Her name did not appear on these stories for very, very many years, and she never got a penny from them. He took all the money from them. So essentially he took her stories and claimed them for his own. What is rather glorious in the revenge of this, I suppose her revenge, is that the story became very well known, that he'd essentially appropriated her work. Nothing of his ever really did anything at all, of course, because he wasn't the writer. But of course, Colette became the most incredibly and important writer of the 20th century, very important in French culture, not just from women's writing, but of course for all readers, men and women, and everybody who reads. And Colette is extremely important. So I loved that poster, the idea that you can tell, again, that subversive history. People know the story of Colette and Willy, but to tell it through the poster that made Claudine so important was wonderful. And then a very moving object, which he says is not an object, and explains why it's not an object, but it is a bunch of hair, and this is from 2022, one of the last in the book, and it was as a way of talking about the women's revolution in Iran, and the covering of hair and the showing of hair and the cutting off of hair. And throughout the book, there are other very important moments about how women's hair in particular is such a political battlefield, how women's hair is often not allowed to belong to them or is taken away from them. Also in the book, there is the famous Robert Capra picture of Chartres, of the women, the tontines, the women who are accused of collaboration, who have had their hair shaved and are paraded through the streets after the end of the Second World War in Europe. So to finish with that and her explanation of why she doesn't see the bunch of hair as an object, but to use that as a way of talking about women in Iran. As I'm recording this in 2023, this has not gone away. And so this is, it's a book to be dipped into. It is very wonderful because it is extremely global, but with quite a lot of French and German and indeed Italian objects to be included. It's perfect Christmas present, should we say? Perfect Christmas present. For me, I've got my own copy, but you could buy it for other people. And it's published, it's going to come out in the autumn from Canongate. Annabelle Hirsch, and the translation is Eleanor Updegraff. And finally, for Mosse on a Monday, September 2023, is an old favourite. I mean, he wouldn't thank me for calling him an old favourite. Ian Rankin, this novel, Exit Music, which actually came out, I think it's 2007 originally. This is, of course, the hardback, my copy, but we've got the paperback on the screen for you. Those of you who have followed any of these or have heard me speak or read any interviews will know that when I am dreaming a new novel, and I'm dreaming my next novel at the moment, just starting to write it, it follows on from The Ghost Ship, and thank you all so much for your support on The Ghost Ship. Wow, it has been one of my most treasured publication experiences, and that's thanks to all of you and your incredible enthusiasm for the novel. And I'm writing the novel that follows on from that. You will get to find out what happens to Louise and Gilles, don't worry. But when I'm doing that and dreaming and lying in bed early mornings thinking about the new novel and thinking, oh, if I do that, then that will work, and if I put that in there, that will change. It's a wonderful moment at the beginning of a book. I can only read novels I've read before, and as you know, mostly I read crime. And so this time, the dreaming for my new book, which hasn't yet got its title, I've reread all of Ian Rankin. And there's a lot, and I'm an enormous fan of Ian Rankin. I think he's one of the great writers of the 20th and 21st century. I think that the best crime fiction absolutely is what deserves to be called state of the nation fiction, although that's often put onto literary fiction and usually only American novels. But state of the nation fiction is what Ian Rankin does, but of course with a crime twist through it. And his latest novel, A Heart Full of Headstones, which is, there is one more rebus to come, we know that, that's been announced, is a work of genius, frankly. But I have an enormous affection for this one, Exit Music, because it is set in the last week of Rebus's career as a police officer in Edinburgh before he retires. And so in the background, the clock is ticking down. And at that stage, of course, we didn't know that Ian Rankin would find a way to keep writing Rebus as a non-serving police officer. And that the great character, not only Siobhan Clarke, absolutely Siobhan Clarke, but also Malcolm Fox, who we first meet in The Complaints. And I became very fond of Malcolm Fox as well, and that the three of them will become this little triumvirate. But at this stage, it looks like it could be the end of Rebus, and this is Exit Music. And if you've read all of them like I have, you followed this detective from a young, hopeful, optimistic detective, well, constable right at the beginning, all the way through to this, not embittered, but this tired man who has walked a little bit close to the line for too long. And here he is in the final days. And of course, the powers that be, the Heidi-hins, I think, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it appears, the high-ups, as we might say in English, they can't wait to see the back of him. But then a Russian dissident poet is murdered in the last week of Rebus's career before retirement, and it leads into a very Ian Rankin story of the shortcuts that police officers used to take. Are they in the pocket of some of the gangland warlords? The great Big Jer Cafferty is in this book, and he becomes a victim himself. And it's an incredibly, I found it, rereading it, incredibly moving, because I remembered thinking, oh my God, is that the end of Rebus? And of course, all very successful crime writers talk about getting fed up with their characters. Agatha Christie couldn't wait to see the back of Poirot. Of course, Conan Doyle murdered Sherlock Holmes and had to bring him back. But we don't know that Rebus is going to keep going at this moment. So there is a plangency in this book. And in all of Rankin's crime fiction, there is, of course, always a big social issue that could be anything. It, could be oil, it could be anything. In this one, it is about the relationship between Scottish politics and Russian money and power. And of course, again, published in 2007, Scottish politics, independence, money, none of these things have gone away. Another thing that I did very much like, which is naughty of me to say, but at one moment Rebus goes into a bookshop and he can't get the girl behind the till to pay attention, and it's because the girl is reading Labyrinth, which is one of my novels, which is, again, a wonderful little thing, which I just thought I would share with you. It's not relevant to this, but it is there. So all of Rankin's books, you can start anywhere. But if you do feel like you'd like to start at the beginning and read all the way through, the sense of the biography of the man, of John Rebus, who he is, how he comes to be here, and has he finally overstepped the mark in his last week before retirement, which will see him stripped of his pension. Well, you'll have to read Exit Music to find out. But it's an incredibly fine novel, as well as being a brilliant crime story. So that's it for September 23, Mosse on a Monday. I will be back in October with another selection of 2 fiction and 2 non-fiction. In between times, I will be writing, of course, and I will be back on the road doing the autumn tour for The Ghost Ship in the UK. So if you want to come and see me in any of the bookshops, I'm in conversation with some incredible people, including Paula Hawkins and Kim Sherwood and SJ Paris. Just go to my website and you will see if I'm coming to a town near you. But for now, thanks for joining me. And remember, doesn't matter what you read, but just enjoy it. Bye for now.